Welcome back to the podcast, guys. Today's episode is going to be a solo episode all about progressive overload. And this is going to be a little bit more of a unique episode because I'm really going to tie in how this concept of progressive overload really applies to every single area of life, not just training. So to start off, I thought it would be cool to kind of pull back the curtains and tell a story about back when I first joined the football team at Ohio State. You know, this is a time in my life where I had just finished up playing lacrosse my freshman year and I was transitioning onto the football team sophomore year. And it was a massive change for me. This is where I didn't really know what the expectations would be like on the football team versus the lacrosse team. But I found out very quickly that it was a lot more responsibility. It was a lot more hours dedicated to the sport, just to the craft in general. And my schedule went from, a couple hours a day, 3 hours a day of demands on top of my schedule with my sport to, 5, 6, 7 plus hours a day. And I'll never forget that first week on the Ohio State football team where I was just like, man, I don't know how I'm going to keep up with this. I had, lifting at, 6 a.m. We had our class window was 8 to noon. Our practice block was like 1 to 7 p.m. And then in that first year, I had to get like study table hours at our student athlete center. So like I had to go to that after practice and like do homework and stuff at like, 7, 8, 9 p.m. So, as a young kid, I'm banking like 12-hour days, as a young student athlete. And it was a ton of pressure and demands on my schedule. And I literally didn't even think I was going to be able to keep up. But deep down, I really knew that I wanted to play for this team. And it was a goal of mine that I really, really wanted so deeply that I was willing to overcome that. I was willing to not give up. I was willing to stick with it and overcome that challenge and get used to these new demands. And that's exactly what happened. Because I stuck with it, what was once hard or felt impossible literally became my norm. By my senior year, that schedule was easy to me. But that first year, it felt borderline impossible. And that was the first time in my life where I really experienced progressive overload outside of the gym. I was stressed. The demands rose. Instead of folding, I overcame them. I adapted and I kept going. And that is the key with progressive overload. And it can be applied to every single area of life. And this very much so happened when I started my training business. I, hit the ground running. I was, a young, fresh out of college, fresh out of my MBA. I was hungry. I was ready to build my business. And, I hit the ground running and, I was attracting clients locally. I had attracted a few clients at the gym I started out at, Colossus. One of the guys actually who was working with a trainer there previously needed a new trainer. So he was like literally my first ever client, Lonnie. And I talked about him on a previous podcast, but, I basically just hit the ground running. I was getting clients, for my in-person training business. And, within that first year, I was able to build a full book of in-person clientele, but without me realizing it, that would only hit another challenge. I would reach a point of capacity where, my time was spread thin. I was completely maxed out. All my hours of the day were dedicated to my in-person clients and I was stuck. This was one of those moments where I could either stay stuck or learn to overcome that challenge and that adversity, gain, the ability to handle more and then keep going. And that was one of those other moments in my life where, I really had to press pause, look at this inflection point and objectively say and look at things as I'm the only one that can change it. I'm the only one that can overcome this, that can rearrange my schedule, that can approach things differently to be able to scale and handle more. Because as a business, you obviously want to keep growing. You want to keep scaling. And what I have found is every single time those responsibilities and demands increase, that friction and that tension also increases with schedule, with capacity. And that's where those inflection points come about. That's where we have a decision to make where we either learn how to manage these new responsibilities or we stay stuck where we're currently at. And that was another one of those sink or swim moments for me where I had to decide, do I stay stuck with this schedule? Do I stay maxed out? Do I stay stuck at this, income level, at this amount of clientele? Or do I make that change? Do I solve this issue? Do I get a little bit better with my time? Do I restructure my business systems and how I'm, approaching my training business in order to handle more and scale further? And that's exactly what I had to do. But if I didn't see that inflection point as that opportunity to change, I would be stuck in that same place 5 years later instead of being much further along than that initial point. And so I think that, this just paints a perfect picture of the concept of progressive overload outside of training, where if we decide to stay comfortable, we're going to stay stuck in that current state. But if we choose discomfort, we're going to adapt, we're going to learn, and we're going to progress further. But we aren't going to get there through staying comfortable. We are only going to get there by getting uncomfortable, facing our challenges, our fears, facing the things that we otherwise are running from. Those are the exact things that we need in order to overcome and keep progressing forward. And so every single time in my life, guys, where I have chosen discomfort, I have grown. I have extrapolated the lesson required to grow beyond that current state. And that's the challenging aspect about this. And I was talking about this with one of my online clients, Zach, inside the gym yesterday, where, we were talking about every hard lesson we've ever had to learn was embedded in an extremely challenging, adverse situation that if we wouldn't have gone through that, we would have never extrapolated the lesson required to keep progressing and keep moving forward. So I just really want to get that point across, that progressive overload is not just a gym concept. It's how all growth works everywhere in our lives. And all growth requires some level of stress, some challenge that we're faced with, whether that be in the gym, challenging ourselves with heavier load, more training volume, more conditioning. That's that stress that we're placing on our body, or new business responsibilities, business growth, more clients. Those are causing stress on schedule, on time. This is where most run. But this is where we have to lean in. This is where growth happens, because this is where adaptation has to occur. When we overcome that initial stress, that's when adaptation happens. That's when we grow beyond our current state and progression occurs. But don't just stop there, because I think what ends up happening is a lot of us have gone through experiences like I'm talking about, where we have something incredibly stressful or adverse that happens in our lives. We overcome it, and then we're better for it. But how many times do we stop that process? And I've been here myself, because I've had to learn the hard way. This is a continuous process. This growth journey is continuous. It's not a one-time thing. And I had to watch this even myself, where, I had that accomplishment with football and, overcoming the challenge of walk on to scholarship athlete. And it's easy to be like, hey, I'm done there. I went through my hardship there. I learned the lessons, and I can just basically coast and maintain. But I've learned the hard way, owning and operating and founding a business, that it doesn't stop. This is a continuous process. And whether it's, business, leadership, training, nutrition, relationships, we have opportunities to grow literally everywhere in our lives and make progress. And I think that that's where a lot of people fall short of making progress, because they don't realize that it is those hard things we are avoiding that otherwise would push us in the direction of where we ultimately want to be. And so this is why I personally believe how you do one thing is how you do everything. How I approach my business, how I approach my fitness, how I approach my relationships are all very much so the same. I take all of these things seriously. And I think if we can kind of look at everything like that, it allows us to show up in these different areas at a high level. This is where I'm showing up and I prioritize my business and my clients and the growth of my business, but I can't let, my relationships fade. I can't let my friendships fade. I can't let my relationship with my wife fade. Those are things that I have to prioritize just as much as I prioritize this business. Now, I think it's also important to note that depending on what season of life we're in, depending on, what we're going through, that might ebb and flow as far as, how much we're focused in within those different areas. We might have to sacrifice a little bit, of our time toward our business to reallocate that time with our family, loved ones, maybe even for our own selves, working on ourselves during a period of time. That's where, it's not going to be perfectly balanced across the board. Sometimes it will be, sometimes we'll have all of those areas balanced, but we are inevitably going to go through seasons of life where, business takes the front seat, other things take the back seat, or, certain aspects of our own personal development and journey start to take the front seat and other things take the back seat. I know I've gone through seasons of life where, it's not like I let my, the focus of my business completely go, but, I had to take my focus on that and pull back a little bit so I could focus on other areas. But nonetheless, the attention to detail, the intangibles of, how I show up, how I approach all of these different areas, very much so is paralleled and the same across the board, where, I am just as focused as showing up, to my family, to my friends, to my relationship, to the people who are important to me in my life, my clients, just like I show up, for my own fitness and health journey, how I show up and prioritize my nutrition, how I prioritize my routines and how I'm living my lifestyle. So I think all of this works cohesively and it all complements one another. When we can get really disciplined and concentrated in our health and fitness, that's going to roll over and positively impact every other area of our life. And I've seen this transformatively in myself and even in clients where, once you start bettering yourself, once you start, asking for more, you're, trying to become more capable than you currently are, that's going to cause you to develop and grow further in your health and fitness. And that's going to spark motivation to grow and develop further in your career and show up differently to those around you. And it's a domino effect. And I think the more we welcome that, the more success we can have all around in our life. And the more we can kind of calibrate and keep all of those areas calibrated in our lives. And so I just think it's important to realize that like this pattern is the same, whether it's progressively overloaded or whether you're progressively overloading in the gym, whether you're progressively overloading in life, the principles all remain the same. We apply pressure and then challenges arise. We spend time with that new challenge. Don't run from it. Get used to it, get comfortable with that new challenge. Then you can handle more. Then we can make progress. And then we repeat that process over and over and over again. And so I think for me personally, what has helped me continue progressing in life, whether that be like, my business, my health and fitness journey, my relationships, career, all across the board, just in life in general, has been my personal development. And this is a practice that started when I stopped playing football at Ohio State. And, I was a lost former athlete. I didn't really know myself. I put all the chips in on the identity as the athlete. And I didn't really know myself outside of that. I didn't know, what are my interests outside of football? Like, what are my skills outside of football? What am I passionate about outside of the game of football? And a lot of that curiosity is ultimately what led me to do what I'm doing today. But it started with personal development. It started with curiosity around, what is out there? Where do my interests lie? Like, what is more aligned with me and what I believe in and what I, feel fulfillment within? And a lot of my personal development started with just exposing myself to other materials, books, podcasts, people who were doing the things I wanted to do, people who were embodying lifestyles that I wanted to embody. And by seeing people in my life model that, it showed me what was possible. And it gave me a lot of motivation to go after my goals. Because when you expose yourself to a lot of these stories of successful people, you realize that every single one of them have gone through a lot of adversity to get to the point they're at right now. A lot of us just see the success story. We see the successful company, the successful founder, but we don't see the trial, the errors, the challenges that they had to overcome in order to have that success and achieve that level of success in their specific craft. So that's why I think it's important to expose ourselves to those stories, to stories like the ones I'm telling you guys right now, because you start to see what's possible and it's highly motivating. And it's like, okay, well, if they could accomplish that, why can't I accomplish that too? And then you become more capable in that pursuit of growth. And that's really everything that, I embody and that I try to challenge my clients with is like, let that be a continuation, because, I said it earlier in the episode and it's just so true that like this journey of growth in all these areas of life never stops. Even when we overcome that challenge, there's always going to be a new challenge and a new lesson to be learned to grow further. And I think that, the other positive kind of lesson from exposing myself to these different books, to these different podcasts, is realizing that like we all have an opportunity to grow and develop. And it doesn't matter what your starting point is. It doesn't matter where you're at currently. We all have the opportunity to choose growth. And recently I found myself, and this was a eye-opening experience for me, and it goes hand in hand with what I was just talking about. But recently I found myself really neglecting a lot of these practices that helped me gain the mindset that I have today. And what ended up happening is, as business gets busy, as life gets busy, like the first thing to go is like our own personal development. And I see this a lot, even in talking to clients and talking to everyday people, where it's like when business and life gets busy, our workouts take a back seat. our personal growth takes a backseat. I did this once before with my reading, with my podcast, with just listening to books, exposing myself to these materials and this personal development. Like when I get busy, when business gets really busy, when life tests me, like that's the first thing to go for me. And then that immediately shuts off my growth. That immediately shuts off the lifeline of like my inspiration, my motivation. And I've realized that because every time that personal development stops, every time I stop growing, progression stops. I get stuck. And then I get frustrated because I'm like, okay, I want to keep progressing, but I sometimes don't even realize it's my own self getting in my own way. And I think that a lot of times, like if we don't ever press pause and stop and evaluate, like it's really hard to decide and even find like, where are we going wrong? Where do we need to, pivot, change? And I think that, there's no coincidence behind that series of events happening where when personal development stops, so does my growth. And I realized that like the growth and the personal development that I go through is ultimately the lifeline of my business pursuits, of my business as a whole. Like if I'm not growing, then my business is just going to plateau. My clients, how are they going to take advice from someone who's not growing themselves? And that's something that I've been huge on, from the start, owning and operating and founding, this training business is like, I have to lead from the front. I have to practice what I preach. And I am constantly doing that, with my fitness, with my training, doing the things that I preach, embodying, the training principles and the training practices and the habits that I want my clients to embody. I also to embody. But, recently I realized it's like I have to apply that same mindset to the personal development piece and to, the mental growth and the conceptual growth, of my business, from a fundamental standpoint of systems, processes, things like that. And the only way I'm able to keep that motivation and, keep progressing in that way is to keep that lifeline open of my personal development, because I've seen it time and time again. When I stop growing, my business stops growing. It's directly tied. And so it's highly motivating for me because, it kind of keeps me accountable. And that's why I tell my clients a lot, I'm like, you guys keep me accountable in a huge way, because I do take passion and pride in leading from the front. And I know that, I have to do that every single day because I know my clients are watching. I know that they are seeking inspiration from me. I'm the one leading from the front. I have to embody these principles. And so I think this whole mentality has really helped me embrace a lot more accountability in my life. And I think that's something that is so easy for us to do. And this ties directly into progressive overload, is like, it's so easy to just blame, circumstance or other things when challenges arise. I've done this so many times myself in business, in my fitness journey, but like, when challenges arise in business and, I start blaming circumstances, I start making excuses for, why I am where I am and why I'm not further along. And, I start to blame, social media, start to blame other things that are outside of my control versus just looking inward and objectively seeing, okay, what in the business just has to improve, and taking the emotion out of it, looking at things, what has to get better? Where do I need to be better? And, the same thing happens with fitness. And I see this directly, especially with talking to potential clients and individuals who are looking to improve their health and fitness. A lot of people come to me and it's like, hey man, I'm doing everything, possible to get, results and see progress in the gym. And then when I start asking questions and we start digging into the depths of what their training looks like, I realize that, we're still very much so at the surface in a lot of ways. Like, we're not progressing our training. We're not repeating our training. It's a lot of, unstructured, kind of doing whatever we feel like. And that is going to be vastly different from, having structure and being deeper in the process where we have attention to detail around, sets, reps, intensity, what we're doing right now in this session, but also how that's playing into the bigger picture of what we're doing over time. And that will drastically change the training experience. So it's like a lot of people end up with the mindset that like, hey, I'm doing everything, because we almost look at fitness and training and our workouts as like checking off a box. But it's like checking off a box is not necessarily going to get us that depth of results that we want. So it's almost like we have this expectation of like, we want these results, but how we're going about it is not, the best way of getting there. And I think that, the best thing for us to do in those moments is to just reflect back on the training, because that's always what it comes down to. Like if we are truly hitting a plateau, it's how we're training, because I've been doing this for a really long time. And, I've even hit this plateau a bunch of times where, I'm hitting a wall in my fitness journey, and it almost always is how I'm training and my approach that I'm taking. And if we can enhance that or improve that, the results and the outcome will drastically improve. So if we can, stop looking at our workouts and our training as just checking a box and go a little bit deeper, get more methodical, more structured with it, get more consistent and repetitive with it to a certain degree, we're going to gain the skills and abilities to go deeper. And I think like that's the biggest thing that, we miss in training. And I think a lot of people do miss in their training is this aspect of progressive overload. Like the reality is that, most people out there are not repeating their workouts or repeating their training. And I see this with even the most advanced gym goers where like, when I'm on the phone with somebody about their training and, I ask them questions about, what does the training look like? What have you been doing? Even some very advanced guys who have been in some of the most elite training environments and they're not repeating their training week by week. And that alone unlocks and solves everything. Like a lot of people feel, less physically capable, and it's because you're kind of starting over every week. It's like if things are changing all the time, we never allow ourselves to actually improve at a skill. It would be like, every time we learn a lesson in school, it's like we're restarting the lesson every time we learn it. That's basically the same thing as changing your workouts every week versus allowing yourself to learn that lesson and progress deeper within that lesson and add more knowledge on top of that and go deeper. That's how you really learn. That's how you really get results. And that's exactly how it works in health and fitness and training. But so many of us lack that progressive overload, which is the thing that's holding us back from becoming more capable. And then pain is another one. A lot of people experience pain in their training, which usually comes about from changing things up a lot and reintroducing a new stressor onto the body every single time we train versus giving the body that same stressor repetitively, getting used to it, adapting, and then progressing further. Just like I was talking earlier about how I applied this to life and how I applied this to lessons in my own life where I was hitting a wall in life. I had to overcome that, adapt, and then progress further. The same thing happens in our training. And I think that, ultimately growth begins when we stop outsourcing responsibility and we start taking ownership for our own actions. And that's where I think like when it comes to business, whether it's business, fitness, this lesson applies where instead of playing the victim and blaming and pointing the finger, we just have to look inward. We have to look at ourselves. We have to look at how we're showing up, our performance. And every single time I've done that, I have been able to identify the thing that was holding me back, solve it, overcome it, and keep progressing. But if we play the victim, if we're like, it's their fault or it's everything else besides me, it's my circumstances, it's the internet, it's the world around me. Like the more we blame that, like the more we're like essentially losing control and giving control away versus like looking inward, taking control, making change, and progressing further. And I think that that's the biggest shift that I encourage you guys to make from a mindset standpoint. And it's kind of ironic that like all of this ties back to the principle and training of progressive overload, but it's just taking that concept and applying it to everyday life. And if we can eliminate that victim mindset that keeps you stuck by, seeking excuses, avoiding discomfort, staying stagnant, like if we can overcome that victim mindset, we can step into a growth mindset that forces growth and adaptation because it forces us to look inward. It forces us to take responsibility and use that friction as feedback for change. And I think that that's one of the single-handed biggest lessons I have learned about overcoming challenges and progressing through my training, progressively overloading through life, is that every single time we hit a point of friction and there's tension, that is an opportunity for growth. But so many run when that tension arises. And I'm challenging you guys that the next time you feel that friction, lean in. Lean into that friction, realize that that is your inflection point to create a growth and further trajectory in your journey, whatever pursuit you're in, whether that be, training, business, fitness, whatever it is. You seeking out that friction, overcoming that friction is what will cause you to go deeper within that pursuit. And, I know that, I kind of have used this principle in the form of talking about life and overcoming challenges in life, but it really at the source is a training principle. And I think that, the hard thing to realize is that like at the end of the day, it really is up to us, to make these changes and to take responsibility, take ownership over our lives. And, that's kind of what I had to do with my training. And it's funny because it's exactly what birthed really the everyday athlete. And basically after playing football at Ohio State, I came from a program of structure. We were obviously progressing our training inside of a D1 football program where we were, repeating workouts to a certain extent. But it was a much smaller window of time. It was like for an off season or, during the summer or during the spring, where we had a very condensed portion of the year dedicated to really hard, high intensity training. And because it was such a condensed period of time and it being so intense, it's almost like our default as athletes where, we only see like successful training as like all out, high intensity, balls to the wall, because like that's all what we were exposed to as, Division I football players. We were never really conditioned or trained for like year-round training. Like, how do I navigate like year to year to year, how to successfully train without like wrecking my body and actually being able to sustain real legitimate progress and feel phenomenal in doing so. And that's really where, when I finished playing, I had no structure. All the structure had left. Any progression that I had within my training had left, and I was kind of on my own at that point. And a lot of athletes find themselves in this point where it's like, our sport leaves us and we're done playing. We still want to keep going. We still want to keep progressing in our health and our fitness and our training, but we don't necessarily really know how. And that's where I had to go down, years of self-discovery. And this was around, whenever I was working like my first corporate job, fresh out of college, and I was really trying to figure things out alongside that. I was basically just doing like workout classes. I was doing like Instagram workouts and workouts that I saw online. And I realized that while I was doing a lot of work and while I was technically training, technically working out, I wasn't seeing much progress, and I wasn't seeing a whole lot of results or gains with I wasn't seeing like progression with my strength or progression with muscle tissue or improvements with endurance and conditioning. Like, it was very much so busy work, but not effective work. And that's where I learned the valuable lesson that progressive overload is the thing that helps you achieve further strength, more muscle tissue, better conditioning, less pain in your joints, a body that feels amazing. The difference is progressive overload. It is the ability to keep progressing and keep repeating exercises to a certain extent that we master them, our body gets used to them, and it rebuilds in the process. So I think that, this would be a really great time to just dive into like exactly what progressive overload really is from a conceptual standpoint. And so I think a lot of us look at progressive overload as like, this is us just adding weight linearly, where what I mean by that is like we're just adding weight more and more and more and more and more over time, like for eternity. And that's not really how this works. It's at a more complex definition. It's about gradually increasing the demands in a way that the body can sustainably adapt to. So it's not about just like steadily increasing that weight over time. Yes, we're going to do that for a duration of time, but at some point, whether that be 6, 8, 12 weeks, we're going to have to pull back a little bit. We're going to have to regress. We're going to have to bring that intensity down so that we can ramp it back up. And that's exactly how, good quality progressive overload looks over a long scale where, we are for a certain duration of weeks, increasing performance, taking a break, letting the body relax, and then ramping it back up. And we do that on the micro picture. And then when we look at the macro, it's basically looks like a big wave, all while continually working upward and improving skill, getting stronger, getting more muscular. So true progression includes weight, so how much we can lift, volume, how much total work we can handle, so how many repetitions, tempo, are we actually controlling the weight as we move it? When you start out on an exercise, it's real unstable, probably can't take it, through that full range of motion just yet, but over time, you're going to control the weight better. You're going to be able to stretch that muscle tissue deeper and get deeper into those ranges of motion, longer stretches in the muscle tissue, which is good for muscle growth. And then skill complexity. I think this is the most underrated aspect of progressive overload because so many people have this mindset, and I see it working in this, where it's like they see an exercise or they see somebody doing something and it's like, that's impossible. But they're saying that through the lens of their own abilities because maybe they can't do it, but that doesn't mean that that person can't. But a lot of times we view things through our own lens of what we're able to achieve. And if we're somebody who has not progressed our training and our workouts are changing all the time, like we've never had the opportunity or given ourselves the opportunity to actually improve that skill. And, I've been doing this for a long time. And I think the Olympic lifts are a phenomenal example of this. Like, I wish I could, pull up a video right here, but like, literally, I have videos of like when I first started Olympic weightlifting, like it was the ugliest reps of all time. Now, 5, 6 years later, like I've literally mastered them. I can do them cleanly. I can load them up, and I feel phenomenal doing it because I allowed myself to develop the skill required for those exercises. So a lot of times, like we look at things and we're turned off to them, but we just haven't developed the skill yet. So that's my whole point with like how I deliver training and how I approach training with my clients is like, we're not just training to build strength. We're not just training to build muscle or conditioning. We're training to literally become more capable. And it's the most empowering thing literally in the world. And that's what I learned when I stopped playing football, that like, wait a minute, I'm not done yet. Like, this isn't the end of the line for me. Like, I'm actually literally just getting started. And that's when I learned how to rebuild my body, how to slow things down, have more attention to detail on how I'm performing reps, actually progressing and repeating training over time to allow my body to get better at the skills of the exercise. Because that's, I think, one of the most underrated things, literally, because even when you look at most people performing reps in the gym, like, you see all sorts of stuff, but like when you can be very disciplined with how you're performing the reps, it literally rebuilds your body. Like, the best way to think about it, guys, is like the more out of control and chaotic the reps are, the more you're going to beat down your body. The more controlled and better the reps are when performed, the more you're going to rebuild your body. And that's literally how it works. And I've taught my clients that, where if we can bring that high level of attention to detail to how we're performing the reps, how we're doing the training, it has the capability to completely rebuild our body. So that's why it's like unfortunate when sometimes I hear people or see people with that mindset of like, where they just feel like they're done. Like, it's like they are no longer able to achieve more. And it couldn't be further than the truth, but it all comes down to the training delivery and the training approach. And to be quite honest with you guys, because training has become so diluted with, generic workout classes, with generic, apps that you can buy, we basically are desensitized to the power training really has when done right. Like, it is literally the difference of staying stuck or becoming more capable. It is literally the difference of constantly being in pain or tangibly rebuilding the body and literally feeling more capable at a later age than you did when you were even younger. Because I can say with full honesty, like, that has happened to me going through this rebuilding process and cherishing progressive overload and using this skill. And that's the irony, is like, as somebody who's deep in this game, like, you start to realize like a lot of trainers, a lot of people in general, like, are not progressively overloading. And it's literally the thing that's holding you back from becoming pain-free, from becoming more capable, from doing exercises you can't currently do. The difference is progressive overload. And we have to repeat things to a certain extent to get better at them. We cannot expect like to just like change things all the time and become amazing at it. Like, it just doesn't make sense. But this is the one area where we have that mindset. So I just challenge you guys, like, really, really work to find structure and cohesion in your training. And if you need help, that's literally why, I have built my Everyday Athlete coaching program, because, basically there was a huge drop off when I got done playing. It's like we have elite high level training for, elite level athletes. And then it's like a massive drop off for everybody else. So I was determined, to take this high level legitimate training that does make you better, that does make you more capable, that does make you feel more confident and capable in what you can achieve, and bring it to the everyday person and expose them to the transformative power of progressive overload. Because when you really cherish it and embrace it, it is the difference. It is the thing that will help you achieve a pain-free body. It is the thing that will help you become capable of skills, exercises, and physical feats that you have not yet been able to do. So that is the difference. And I'm telling you guys, like, that's a huge reason why too. And this just blows my mind, but like, whatever training approach you are currently taking is either holding you back or progressing you forward, plain and simple. And I see this a lot, with clients where, they'll come from, doing, for example, like they, have been doing a bunch of workout classes and they're like, Zach, like, dude, I'm just not seeing results. I'm not seeing progress. I feel like I'm hitting a major plateau. I'm just going through the motions. And it's like, all right, let's change the approach. Let's go from changing things all the time, every week you're in the gym, to like, let's actually progress these exercises for at least 4 weeks. And that's another thing too. I think that it'll be a breath of fresh air for you guys listening, because anytime I talk about this concept of like repeating exercises. I think a lot of times people like take it to the extreme where they think like I'm doing the same exercises, for a year straight. But how I like to do it is honestly like, especially for clients, running training blocks. So doing anywhere between, 4 to 6 week training blocks where, we're repeating exercises for at least 4 to 6 weeks. And then at the end of those 4 to 6 weeks, we can swap out some of the variations used, all while targeting the same muscle tissue. So we're still getting like that macro picture progressive overload as well as the micro picture progressive overload while keeping variation alive and keeping it exciting for the clients where, they're introducing new variations, new skills, new exercises that they otherwise haven't done before. And I think it's really healthy to do that. Like do different variations of an RDL, of a hip hinge, do different variations of a chest press, of a bench press, do different variations of pulling. And you're going to target and utilize slightly different tissue. You're going to challenge the body in a slightly different way. So that's how I like to kind of marry progressive overload with variation where it's still effective while also being fun for my clients. And then for me, like I've been doing this for so damn long that like, I'm to the point where I pretty much just like repeat things on end. And then when I get sick of something or I'm like, hey, I want to like do something different, I just swap out one exercise and throw it in and then just keep progressing. Because at the end of the day, that really is how you will get better at these different exercises. That's how like, on my story, sometimes I'll post me like lifting a ton of weight on like RDLs, like super controlled for reps. Like the other day I was doing like 355 or something like that, like on RDLs for like really tempoed controlled reps for like 6 to 8. And like, that's my whole point. It's like, if you can prioritize how you're performing the reps first, as you increase load over time, you're basically going to protect your body from ever getting hurt or ever being in pain while getting incredible results along the way. So like, I'm trying to get you guys to realize like there quite literally should be no instance where like we're causing pain or injury on the body, like from our training, because like when done right, it's rebuilding your body. When done wrong, it's deteriorating your body. And I'm posing that to you guys to look at, your own training and evaluate and think, is this building my body up or is it beating my body down? And so basically there's this huge misconception. And I talked about it a little bit there, but there's this huge misconception that like lifting weights and training causes pain. And that thought process stems from a lack of progressive overload, because it's kind of like what I was saying earlier. If we're changing the stress being placed on the body, say every week or every session, we're not going to feel the best. Our body is going to have a negative response every time we try to throw something like really hard or really intense at the body that it's not yet used to. So I think this is also a good time to teach you guys where if you're ever trying to get into an activity, start at a super low intensity. I will never forget, I was in the gym one time and I saw one of my former lacrosse teammates from Ohio State, and he had came up to me and mentioned like, and I didn't even say anything to him. I, obviously just like let him tell me what he was doing, but he had told me, he's like, dude, man, I have just been out of the gym like for so long. And he's like, I'm coming in here and he's like, I'm going to just absolutely destroy my legs on squats. And, I didn't say anything. I was just like, yeah, like, do your thing, man, like be smart. But it hit me. I'm like, not a lot of guys understand this principle of regression, where it's like, if you're ever trying to reintroduce yourself to, say, a squat, a running, conditioning, a bench press, whatever it is, start at a low intensity. Make it so easy that your body can handle it to a T. It can get comfortable with that stimulus, that stress. Then, as it gets comfortable with that stress and stimulus, you can then increase that stress and you can then add more. But if we try to add more too fast, that's when we get hurt. So it's like, we have to have the discipline to meet ourselves where we're at. And this is what I do with my clients. It's like, and I think this will be good for you guys to hear too, because a lot of times people will see, my training or some of the guys I work with, and they think that like, I only work with like super advanced clientele. And at the end of the day, like while a lot of my clients tend to be like people who are deep in their fitness journey, I meet everybody where they're at. And that's how I would encourage you guys to do it in your own training, where it's like, meet yourself where you're at. Don't try to like, hit this ridiculous weight, in the first day you try an exercise. Like you have to give yourself the opportunity to develop that skill and build into it. Just like your guys' jobs and careers. It's not like on the first day you stepped into that job and you're like the best at what you do. Like you guys had to like repeat things and get better at skills and things like that. And it goes back to, you know, what I said about going deeper. Like a lot of times, like even if you've been working out for a long time, like you might still be stuck at the surface. Like, and I see that with a lot of the guys that I work with, like, you know, they kind of been doing the same things for a really long time, but they're stuck in that same place they've always done it. We haven't broken deeper, but we have to go deeper to get better. But no matter who I'm working with, I assess, you know, where is their starting point? What have they done up until that point? And how can I meet them exactly where they're at, you know, with exercises, with skills that they're 100% capable of, get them in the door, get them going, get them consistent. Then we build from there. And I think that's where like a lot of people miss it, where like, you know, maybe they'll get into a program or maybe they'll start a program and then just like plateau there. But that's the whole point of like how we do things in Everyday Athlete is we keep you progressing, you know, over years and years and years. It's not, you know, just a 6 or 8 week program or challenge. You know, we are progressing clients for weeks, months, and years over time because of this valuable principle of progressive overload. Because if we do it correctly, we just keep getting better. You know, if we do this properly, if we embrace the principle of progressive overload, we will just keep improving, keep getting stronger, keep building muscle, keep, you know, increasing our endurance, keep deepening our skills around what we're capable of. And that's, you know, what I've seen in my parents too. They're almost 70 years old. And, you know, when they started with me in their apartment, they were, you know, my dad was already yelling, you know, 20 pounds in each hand. Now he's already yelling 70s in each hand, like literally 140 pounds. Like that doesn't happen randomly. That happens from progressive overload. That happens from us repeating that exercise over time. And, you know, this ties into that point I was making about this misconception around like pain and lifting heavy. And it's because like of that instance where when we try to like say we're doing like a squat for the first time or a bench for the first time, we go in there and try and PR. Of course, we're going to, you know, potentially get hurt or feel some pain because again, it's a large amount of stress on the body that the body has not gotten used to. But think of a different scenario. If we've been, you know, say we started, like I said, like super low intensity with a light weight, we can take through full range of motion and with a lot of control. And then we slowly, you know, built over time. Once we get to that heavy load, our body's going to be like, cool, you know, we're ready for it. I can handle that. I've been adapting to this point that my body can now handle this weight. And that's where heavy lifting can be a completely different experience, whether you're, you know, doing it randomly every now and then. I'm just trying to like PR with no progression. That's where the pain and the injury is likely going to happen versus allowing the body to adapt, get stronger, progress with that exercise, with that weight over time. Then it's going to be ready for it. That's where we can lift heavy and feel really damn good doing it. And that's what I'm trying to show, you know, with a lot of my training. And, you know, when I'm hitting some of these heavier loads is like, you know, I'm never in pain and I'm never hurt from my training because of progressive overload, because I allow my body to adapt to what I'm asking of it. And pain almost always, like I can tell you guys from experience, from working with clients, pain almost always comes from random loading or trying to hit a heavy weight on an exercise that you haven't been progressing or repeating. Poor technique. If the primary muscles can't handle the weight being lifted, then other tissues in the body are going to try to overcompensate, which can lead to pain or injury. And then just no real training progression overall. So this is when training is just constantly changing. You're constantly introducing new stress onto the body instead of letting the body get used to that same stress over time. So it took me so long to get to this point, guys, but I'm telling you, performance training does not require suffering and joint and body deterioration. And I used to think this because I used to associate performance training with random heavy lifting. But performance training, when done right, makes you more capable. So you can tell where the mindset shift happens. It's like when I was doing random training and random heavy lifting, and I had the mindset that that caused pain and injury, and I had the mindset that like any heavy lifting would cause pain or injury because my experience was like always changing. But on this other side, like where the progressive overload, you know, is present, you know, I'm going through these progressions and regressions in my training and I'm allowing my body to adapt. It's like, okay, now I have evidence that I can lift heavy and I can do it without pain. And that's why I'm saying like our experience in training is constant feedback. So like, I really encourage, especially if you're a former athlete out there, you know, a lot of times we have the mindset, especially more than anyone else, that like, oh my God, I can't lift heavier, I'm going to hurt my body. And I'm telling you guys from experience, that mindset comes from our experiences in college with, you know, old school approaches to training where it was a lot of ego lifting, heavy lifting, you know, pushing the body past what it's currently capable of. Like that's what we were exposed to. So we have this unfortunate mindset that like all heavy lifting is bad for us, when in reality, it's just we are limited by our own previous experience. Where if we were just exposed to quality progressive overload, quality training, where we're repeating things over time and getting better and enhancing skill, then we would have the evidence that we can do this thing pain-free. We can lift heavy weight pain-free. We can get better at this. So you can see where the approach fuels the mindset. So I really encourage you guys to try to break away from that thought process if you are someone that is thinking like that, because I'm showing you and I'm hopefully resonating with you to see that it doesn't have to be that way and that there is better out there. And it just comes down to how we're training and the approach that we're putting forth. And so I know that, for former athletes, a lot of us struggle without having structure and progressive overload in our training because we do rely on those old intensity habits like I was talking about where, it's constant heavy, heavy, heavy. And I'm telling you guys, like, we have to get into the mindset of like light, low intensity workouts are phenomenal because we need those mixed in with our high intensity training to be able to sustain this thing long term. We cannot do high intensity training every day, every week, every month, every year. That is a surefire formula for just running our body into the ground, running our hormones into the ground, and being in a state where we're quite literally never really recovering. So it's really easy for us to rely on those old intensity habits and for us to rely on more ego, based training. That just becomes our default in a lot of these weight rooms that we experienced in high school and college. It's almost like ingrained in us to just like chase heavy load. It's almost like heavy load is like the only measure of success, when in reality, like I would argue, like that's kind of like last on my priority list. I'm prioritizing like how well are we taking this weight through space? Like how well are we moving with the load? Are we in control or are we out of control? All of that criteria I prioritize first before we increase the load. But a lot of times we'll sacrifice all of those things in order to increase the load. But then that's when we end up hurt or in pain. So you can kind of see, guys, that if you embrace those principles, you will avoid that from pretty much ever happening. And that's how I'm able to train in the way that I am and avoid pain and injuries. And as adults, as we grow up, and we still try to do a lot of those same things, embracing the ego lifting mindset, old intensity habits, like that's just going to cause pain, plateaus, frustration around what we're capable of, why we're not capable of more. And you guys are constantly seeing over and over again how progressive overload is the bridge. It is the bridge back to athleticism. It is the bridge back to confidence and what you're capable in. And it's back to ultimately being a more capable human being physically. And that's like really the point I'm trying to drive with this piece of progressive overload with training, is that it literally will make you guys more physically capable. And I experienced this literally to a T with training for high rocks and competing in high rocks and competing in half marathons. I am telling you guys, the most I ever ran before all of this in college, even when I was playing lacrosse, was literally like a 5K. Like I was doing like 3 miles max. And I'll never forget when we ran a 5K for lacrosse, I was like literally dying. Like I like could hardly even finish 3 miles, like as a D1 lacrosse player. And fast forward, I'm now running, 13 plus miles. I'm competing in high rocks. I'm doing endurance things that like should not even be things that I can do. Like, especially me being like a 6'1", 215 pound, like power football athlete, like it quite literally doesn't make a whole lot of physiological sense how I'm even doing those things. And the only way I am doing them is because of my training and because of progressive overload. And that's why I'm so passionate about this topic, because it literally showed me that I'm still capable of more. But I had to regress and I had to go backwards in order to get there. And so I think it's really important to talk about this, because a lot of us, I think, can find ourselves in this circumstance and get stuck here without realizing there's a solution. So there was basically a period of time for me post-football, and this is where I had to learn this lesson the hard way, where, I was very much so of that mind I just talked about. Constant ego lifting, constant heavy weight, constant high intensity cardio, no intensity regulation. And I was basically in this mode where I was doing a lot of cross training, kind of like the hybrid training like I'm doing now, where it's like I'm doing heavy lifting, I'm doing muscle-based training, I'm doing cardio and endurance all together and progressing all of those things together, which, yes, by the way, when not done correctly, is a surefire way of disaster from a recovery standpoint and from a body feeling standpoint. But if you have structure, if you have progressive overload, if we have smart exercise science behind how we're distributing all of those things, we can without a doubt, work on all of those forms of fitness within one training program. And so I didn't know the things that I knew now. And back then it was just one motor, high intensity, all out effort every day. And so I was in that mode. I was Olympic lifting. I was doing big compound lifts like your deadlifts, your squats, your bench presses. I was doing a lot of high intensity conditioning and cardio and, mixed modality with like ski, bike, row, running, mixed with exercises and ab exercises, like very much so cross training, hybrid training style, but without progressive overload. And that's what literally ran my body into the ground, because I was never basically taking a step back. I was never regressing or going lower intensity to give my body a chance to recover and recalibrate. And I'm telling you guys, like, it literally got to a point where, I would train my in-person clients, I would work out, and I would be so exhausted from overtraining that like I'd have to take a nap during the day. I was like irritable all the time. Like I was in a bad mood. Like my mental health was in a bad place. And it was all stemming from like way too much unregulated stress on my body. And I think a lot of men fall into this and they almost like, they don't even know any different. They're just like, they think what is correct is like high intensity all the time. So they can't even identify that like the training is the thing that's hanging them up, and the unregulated stress that they're putting on their body is what's causing them to quite literally like feel shitty and feel broken down and beaten down. So I'm helping you guys realize that like the training can either do that or it can build us back up. And so basically this is where I had to learn, like, you can't go high intensity all the time and expect to make progress and expect to recover. And I was completely fried and had to get to that point where it was like, take a step back, let the body just like recover again. Cause it was kind of funny. It was like destroyed my body in football, came out of football, stopped training for a little while, had to get back into it. I told that story, on a previous podcast. And that's really what sparked like a lot of my development of where I am today, to like going to high intensity again, as a former athlete and as a new young trainer, to only learn the lesson finally that I have to pull back. I have to regress intensity to be able to progress long-term. And this is where, I found regression is not a weakness. And sometimes you truly have to do less to be able to do more. So in that moment, I pulled back. I had to really bring the intensity back down, do some low intensity cardio, rebuild, some of these exercises, slow things down, go lighter, like relearn, reteach myself some exercises through deeper ranges of motion. That was a huge unlock for me. I basically used this as an opportunity to like relearn everything, where I just went back to ground zero. And like, especially on like, I'm just thinking about like presses. Like I used to be like partial ranges of motion, heavy ass load. Now it's like, I take those presses as deep as I possibly can in my pecs. And again, when you prioritize the range of motion and how you're performing it, then as you progress the load over time, you're going to be able to handle heavier weights with more control. Another key why progressive overload is such a cheat code. So I was able to make those regressions, rebuild, how I was performing exercises, rebuild the skill, rebuild just the intention and the approach behind how I was lifting. And then by doing so, I ramped intensity back up, but now I understood the lesson. I knew that it couldn't be for good. It couldn't just be, I stay at this high intensity for good. Okay, after, a certain duration of time, 4, 5, 6 weeks, let me pull that intensity back down, ramp it back up, pull intensity back down, ramp it back up. And over time, those small windows where we pull back and allow intensity to drop, that's what allows our body to recover. Because remember guys, we are not getting the gains from the training itself. The training is creating the adaptation. In the recovery is where we're getting the gains. So I think it's just so valuable to look at it from that lens, because then you'll prioritize recovery as much as you prioritize your training, because you'll realize like, I'm only getting the benefit when I allow my body to regulate stress, calm down, and actually recover. And then playing into more of an advanced picture, this is how I'm able to do different things throughout my week, but I'm just smart about the intensities of each thing, where not every single run I do is a high intensity, PR mileage run. Some of my runs are intentionally like super easy. Some of my lifts, same way, are intentionally easy. And I do that because recovery is so important, because in recovery is where our testosterone is regulating, where our hormones are regulating, where our muscles are recovering, where our central nervous system is regulating its recovery. And that central nervous system is the kind of heartbeat of all progression. So, if we're running ourselves into the ground, if that central nervous system is stressed out, we are not going to be able to recover. And so I think that, it's just so important, guys, to realize that this principle of progressive overload can bridge the gap. And it's literally what bridged the gap for me. So, when I was in that point of, beating my body into the ground, there's no way I would have been able to handle, the halves or high rocks. And so by going through that period of rebuilding and regressing, that is what enabled me to be able to do some of these things, because I finally learned how to progressively overload correctly. I finally learned that I had to give myself time to progress and regress, to do high intensity as well as low intensity, to gain those skills over time. And that's how I've been able to get, stronger, fitter, and more capable, is by going back to ground zero, rebuilding my body, and then understanding that it's going to give and take and ebb and flow. It's not going to be high intensity all the time, but we are going to have to weave in some lower intensity, some moderate intensity workouts in order to gain that recovery. And so I think that it's just so important to realize that performance and longevity can coexist, but it all comes down to the training approach. And if we can be really smart about how we're pursuing performance goals and how we're progressing the training in order to achieve those performance goals, that's where we can get those longevity benefits. That's where, if we put the body first, kind of like I was describing, where, we sometimes go lower intensity, we sometimes, take a full rest day, multiple rest days in a week, I think is incredibly beneficial. And these are our opportunities to regress so we can progress and we can have performance and longevity coexist, because intelligent training wins long term. The people who are training in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond are the ones who are training smart. And I think that it really, the difference, guys, in like training that beats you down and training that rebuilds you, the difference is how you're training and the progressive overload. If things are constantly changing, constantly introducing new stress to the body, that's what's going to lead to pain. But if we can get used to that stress, get settled with that stress, get used to it, make this something where it just feels easy to us, then we can handle more. And that's the essence of progressive overload, guys. And at the end of the day, this really is a principle that stems far beyond just training, and it, applies to every area of life, whether that be, business systems and growth, time management, habits, relationships, training, nutrition, stress management. All of these things we have an opportunity to go deeper in all of these things, and small intentional improvements within each of these things will compound over time. And just always remember that the more chaotic, the more random the approach is, the more chaotic and random the results will be. So if we want to progress, if we want to move beyond our current state, we need that structure and cohesiveness around the actions that we're putting forth to ensure that we're progressing in the direction we want and not staying stuck, maintaining, and plateauing. And so I think the biggest thing that I want to leave with you guys is that progressive overload is that difference. It is the difference between staying stuck or improving. It is the difference between experiencing pain in the gym or experiencing quality performance gains. It's the difference between being frustrated, with lack of results and your body feeling beat down, or feeling confident in what you're actually capable of and unlocking that mindset that I'm not even near done. I can accomplish all of these things. And the solution is smart, consistent, progressive training. And so this really is the foundation of everything we do in Everyday Athlete, guys. Throughout this episode, you can see I've given examples as well, of various clients and situations where, even with my parents, where, we've been able to overcome these physical challenges. We've been able to rebuild their bodies. I've been able to rebuild my body, from taking this smarter approach with training by, sometimes taking steps back so you can progress forward, sometimes rebuilding and, going lighter, relearning some of those ranges of motion and some of the skill and technique on these exercises so you can handle more in the future. Because that's the thing that I've learned doing this is like, it's not about doing more. Like a lot of times people are like, I got to do more of this, I got to do more of that. But it's taking what you're already doing and going deeper with it. And that's exactly what we do in Everyday Athlete. And that's exactly what I help my guys do, is help them see the things that they're not seeing in their training that are otherwise holding them back. That if we solve they're going to keep progressing in the direction of their goals and results, but they're also going to feel really freaking good along the way. And that is really, my goal at the end of the day is really to show people through quality training what they're truly capable of. Because yes, we know this, we can gain strength, we can gain muscle, we can improve our endurance and our conditioning. But the most underrated principle of progressive overload and of training in general is the ability for it to make you more capable tomorrow of things that you were incapable of yesterday. And I think that is the coolest part about training. And it has the ability to do that for us, but we have to be open to progression. We have to be open to repetition instead of constant variation in order to even unlock the ability to experience what I'm talking about. So I really hope that this episode inspired you guys, to be more intentional in your training, to realize that if you're not where you're at, it always comes down to the approach we're taking toward training, toward fitness. And if you need help assessing that, taking a look at what you're doing to see, where we're falling short, hit me up, message me. I'd be happy to help. This is literally what I'm helping my guys with, because a lot of the guys that I work with, they are guys that want to keep progressing, just like I was when I was post-football, where I wanted to keep progressing. I wanted to keep getting better, but I had no sustainable solution for the longevity of my life or for the long term of my life. And so that's the whole reason I created Everyday Athlete, is for guys who want to keep progressing for life and do so smart and intelligently so they can feel amazing and become capable of so much more. Because that's really what it's about at the end of the day, guys, is about becoming capable of more and being able to handle more. And at the source, progressive overload enables that in life, in fitness, in business, in all areas. We have to accept stress, accept challenge, get comfortable with that challenge and that stress, overcome it, and then progress. And then we don't keep that process, or we don't shut that process off. We keep that process going for life in all these areas of life. And so as always, guys, feel free to reach out if you need anything, have any questions, or want to go deeper on any of these topics. I'm always an open book. And thank you guys for tuning in. Make sure to leave a 5-star review on Spotify. Leave us a comment, a review on Apple Podcasts. It would mean the world. It would really help us continue to grow and develop further and help me reach more individuals like yourselves. So really appreciate you guys for tuning in. As always, reach out if you need anything.